Hello, everyone. I am here today to talk about the plantation, a matter of perspective. And so, as I had mentioned before in previous weeks, how how in previous weeks how I talked about the more things that change, the more things don't be the same. And so, what I wanted to do was come back around and talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like from the historical framework that I was like to show you the correlation between the past and the present. So I did a little presentation, so I hope you like it. So I wanted to do this, I guess, as a presentation than just yapping, okay? And so I wanted to kind of so what I plan to do is build up on these things because next year is going to be a very big year. And I want to do my part by just doing my part. And so this is something that I want to do my part. Something I had planned on in the previous time, but I feel like now better than never. Okay. So I just want to not only I just want to introduce some concepts. And if anybody have any ideas, please share them with me because I would love to like put things out there because I had a young person tell me about a couple of years back saying that they didn't really know about voting. They didn't understand um, a lot what was going on at the time. And I heard this from a number of young people. So this stuff can be shared with young people. And I also, like I said, can be found on YouTube. So maybe I'll change the age from 18 to make it for everybody. So this way I just learn how to watch my mouth and make sure I don't say anything that's going to be any type of profanity. But I just think that if you can, please share because I want to start segments on leading up to what we need to know about the government, political science, history. It's going to be kind of all that stuff. And then eventually I will also do things on mental health and substance abuse too. But because I'm not really organized right now, I apologize. I'm going to get there. I just wanted to start somewhere. So this is where I'm starting at. So, slave submissive syndrome is basically what I have been kind of talking about when I talk about the plantation mindset. And so, slave submission syndrome is a pathology of psychological oppression, which develops into an enslaved mindset, whether consciously or unconsciously, distorting how their submissiveness is not seen as a threat or wrongdoing. So, lo and behold, what a lot of us do not know or see then we don't see it, is that because the United States of America was founded on all of these things that we're seeing today, it's just kind of ingrained in us. It's like our family traditions, right? The same way we celebrate our holidays and birthdays. It's a cultural, social, systemic phenomenon that we all just kind of do what we do based on the hierarchical positions that we're born into. So even though the United States of America does not practice a caste system, we're still a caste system. So, one of the things that I have conceptualized over time, based on a lot of my studies that I do for school and things of that nature, is the difference between racism versus superiority. And so, over the years of being in a lot of community dialogues on race and racism, anti racism as such, I come to the understanding that for white people, they'll say, I'm not a racist. I'm not a racist. And they'll stand on that like they're not a racist. However, there is a superiority complex that again puts us back into the caste system mindset. And so maybe in the future I'll talk a little bit more about the caste system and also go back into that conversation of Stockholm syndrome I introduced maybe about last year sometime. But so when we talk about racism as mostly race, all the isms is which is usually followed in the marginalized groups, right? Uh, ableism, ageism, all that kind of things. but we're mostly familiar with racism because racism is the foundation of this country, and I'm going to be introducing you to this in a few seconds. But I want to tell you how it somewhat started. Okay, so in 1640, there was two white men and one black man. His name was John Punch. They both were running. They all three was considered indentured servants at that time. Upon being caught, the two white men received a lesser punishment of an extended indentured servitude, while John Punch was sentenced to serve his said master for natural life. Okay, so this is kind of like the foundational part of when enslavement happened. So the case known as the John Punch case is considered a pivotal moment in the legal transition from blacks going from indentured servitude to lifetime race-based chattel slavery in colonial America. So upon this time, mainly starting in Virginia, Jamestown, that is, there was there was slave codes that was developed around the division of the indentured versus the enslaved. Okay, and so in Jamestown, when they started bringing more Africans over to the United States or America at that time, they had to develop laws to, or codes, as they say, codes as to what could be legally binding to separate those with rights versus those with no rights. So what I'm going to do is later on, I'm going to show you the correlation of why we're still on the plantation. But just to kind of give you some examples of what that used to look like, slave codes pre-Civil War defined enslaved people as property. Again, when they talk about white men and property, we were the property. And I want that to be ingrained in your brain as into the difference in superiority, right? To know that we were owned by them. Laws established that enslaved people were property that could be bought, sold, and passed down. Okay, chattel, where if Massa Jones died, then I go to Massa Jones Jr., his son, right? Restricted basic freedoms. They prohibited enslaved people from marrying, traveling, owning property, and being educated. Okay, controlled movement and assembly. Laws limited their movement by requiring travel passes and restricted their ability to gather in groups. Prohibited rights against white people. They were forbidden to testify against white people in court and could not own weapons. Okay, so that's the slave codes, which was pre-Civil War. Now we go into the black codes. The black codes were post-Civil War codes. And that means the black code said, okay, now we're going to grant these people their civil rights. So initially, black codes did not grant all rights, but it did grant some rights. So some of these rights was being able to marry legally and own property as a concession to the new reality of freedom. And also forgot to add education in there. So one of the three things that were post-war Civil War rights for black people was the right to own property, the legal ability to marry who they chose to marry, and then also education. Okay. They created a system of control. They used laws like vagrancy statutes to arrest and force unemployed African Americans into labor to secure a cheap workforce while white landowners. So that's the whole phenomenon of sharecropping. Also, just keep in mind too, black mothers who had children during incarceration, their children became the wards of the state. Okay. Now, again, on the next slide, I'm going to make a correlation to the plantation then and the plantation now. So I might be kind of going back and forth on these slides. Restricted labor and movement. Laws restricted the types of jobs black people could hold, required them to have employment with the landowner, and limited their ability to move freely. Okay. Continued restrictions. They still prohibited blacks from testifying against white people in court, serving on juries, and owning firearms. Okay. And laid the foundation for Jim Crow. The backlash to these codes led to the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment, which again is the rights to naturalization and citizenship. But the failure of Reconstruction allowed many of the same restrictions to be revived under the later Jim Crow laws. Okay, so what happened was, again, when we talk about the pre-civil rights stuff, and then we talk about the post-civil rights stuff. Now let's look at the extension. Like, let's look at the black codes were an extension of the slave codes, and the plantation moves on. So examples of yesterday and today. Vagrancy. Vagrancy is unemployment. What tends to happen to people who are unemployed is incarceration. Because if you're unemployed and you're able to make money, then of course that means you're going to end up doing something illegal. And they say what a devil's idle mind is a devil's playground. So back in the day with vagrancy, as these shifts, these paradigm shifts were being made from from enslavement to free, white people were still getting real clever in how they try to prevent black people from independence. So what they even would do is, because most black people in the free coming into freedom had a lot of skills, right? Kind of what DeSantis said, like, they weren't slaves, they were people that had skills, or they learned skills. No. Majority of the black people that came over here already were skilled. They were already skilled at rice growing, agriculture, sciences, metal, all kind of stuff. We as Africans, they knew what they were going to get when they went to go get us. And so what would happen is things like seamstress, welders, horseshoe makers, all those type of jobs end up having to be required to get a license to do those jobs. So if you didn't have a license, you couldn't be hired. So that was just one more hurdle that black people had to go through. And lo and behold, that still happens to this day. College degrees, licenses to be nurses. I was just saying the other day that I know a lot of black women, instead of being CNAs, should be RNs. They really should. But because of which I do agree there needs to be some education behind it, but the bar is kind of high on that. And a lot of black women, they really could make some good nurses. They make great CNA nurses, but they don't have, basically RN just gives you the authority of. That's all it does. And it just separates, right? It separates. And so, when you need licenses like for counseling, AODA counseling, all of those things are like kind of like barriers to kind of screen out people. And so a lot of times black people, which start off very young in elementary, junior high, high school, to go to college is sometimes not in the picture. So again, the vagrancy is a big situation. And that the reason why I got it on there first is because we're getting ready to head back down that road again real soon. Right now, with Trump being in office, already there's a job, like the job market is taking a big hit. And the people that's going to be hit the hardest is, of course, black people, because we've always been hit the hardest. And so now vagrancy is going to justify incarceration. So we're going to see this playing out all over again. Loitering. Now, some of you might not know this, some of you may know this, but again, there's a very big difference between 4 black guys standing around talking to each other versus 4 white guys standing around talking to each other. Okay. And so when 4 black guys are standing around talking to each other, they look suspect. When 4 white guys stand around talking to each other, they don't. And that's just the way it is. It shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is. And so that started back in the black codes and the slave codes. Break it up. You cannot loiter. And that was mainly for black people. Annual labor contracts. Same thing with temp services, right? Not to say temp services are for black people only, but because black people tend to not be able to get jobs or come out of prison or things like that, they're more of a marginalized group that are falling into these temp services. And what do temp services do? They're temp. So you're not going to necessarily, it takes a lot to become hired on to these companies, and they don't offer benefits and things of that nature. So if you get sick and get time off, that means you got to start that job over, that clock over again. So a lot of people can never become full-time employees because it takes a lot to get to a full-time hired on position when you work for a temp service. So again, annual labor contracts, that's the correlation with that. Enslavement by debt, restitution. So when people come out of prison, or you have a crime that you committed, or whatever the case may be, you are paying restitution. So that's the same thing by being enslaved by debt, or being enslaved by debt with loans, credit. I was just sharing with a client the other day, which is probably too much information, but I was sharing with her the when I used to be caught up in that check and go stuff. Always robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? That enslavement by debt was like those type of things when you always robbing Peter to pay Paul. And so when I was caught up in that check and go and cash for less or whatever kind of stuff that was back in the day, that would be enslavement by debt. Example: parents who did not allow their children to work were considered unfit, and the state received these children as orphans. Again, child protective services. And that goes back to when I was talking about in the Black codes, when I was talking about how if Black mothers who had children during incarceration, their children would become wards of the state. Same thing now. More Black women have lost their children to the state for whatever the reasons are, more so than white women. And actually, I don't have the actual statistics to show this, but based on the fact that I have worked with reunification, family reunification for a while, I did see a big difference in the way white women services differ greatly from Black women services. Um, Again, kept Black people under surveillance of all their comings and goings. Probation, police, right? So again, you're not going to find police officers patrolling white communities or stopping white kids to ask them what they're up to, or just anything. And so whether they know it or not, that's a privilege, just to not be harassed or to be questioned. And then Blacks were prevented from suing or bringing cases before the court. So like, even now, for some of you who may have worked and you're like, okay, Megan did something to me at work, and and it's like, well, maybe it was unintentional. Maybe she didn't mean to do it, instead of like looking into it, right? But as soon as Megan say Terry did something, it's like you were reported that you were doing something, and so we're gonna have to write you up or whatever. So example, I know I said I was gonna try to stay away from work, but I'm gonna give you an example. So when I was working for Genesis Behavioral outpatient services, it was a team of Black women, and then they started to kind of incorporate more white women into the fold at that particular clinic. And so when I was working, they had a hard time keeping employees. So it was me, three other girls. We were all what they call AODA counselors, alcohol drug counselor, downtown. And so what happened was that I was working from 9 to 9 because they had started an evening IOP, intoxicated program, intensive outpatient program. Sorry, it's all these acronyms. So I was doing the IOP groups, and so they started these IOP groups, but they didn't have the employees at the time to fill those positions. So I made good money then. So I was working from 9 to 9. So I start off 9 to like 3 or 4 over downtown. Then I go over to the south side on 9th and Mitchell and do the evening group. Anyway, they hired a white girl. Well, there was another white girl that was working there, but when they hired the other white girl, and she was like, she just got hired. This is the thing, she just got hired. And she asked me to cover her groups. So I said no. I said I wasn't going to cover her groups because I've been doing them for like 3 months. I was tired at this point, and you got hired to work, but lo and behold, I guess she didn't tell them she had to go on vacation. Now, must I mind you, I haven't had a vacation, much less even knew what a vacation was, because they worked us like slaves. So she went and told, I guess, HR somebody that I wouldn't work for her. So they called me into the office and they wrote me up for not being a team player, because I wouldn't work for her when I was already working for her. Y'all hired her to take over what I was doing already. So why hire her if you want me to continue working for her? Why she go on vacation and she just started working for this company? So I was pissed. I was pissed. And then after that, I had an attitude problem, because it's like, you talking about not being a team player, and I just did 3 months of 9 and 9s for y'all while y'all waited to hire somebody, and you gonna write me in for not being a team player? That kind of stuff. Then the Casual Killing Act of 1669 legalized the killing of a slave while correcting them because of malice. So, if, for instance, the Casual Killing Act meant that if a slave owner beat their slave to death, that they didn't mean to do so, that would get them off. Like, sir, your honor, I didn't mean to kill my slave, because that was considered bad economics to kill your slave, right? So here go another thing that I wanted to also make a correlation to in this process of what these things look like. So the Fourth Amendment is like search and seizure, right? So I put the Roman numeral and the actual number, just in case people don't know what IV means. It doesn't mean like, stat, like help get the doctor in. IV is for those who don't know. So Amendment 4 is search and arrest. So that's basically ICE. ICE is doing illegal search and seizure by kicking in doors and snatching people out their houses without asking questions. And keep in mind, eventually we are all gonna have to have travel passes like back in the slave days. So we will be required to carry passports. So for those of you who can, start getting your passports right now, because when everybody have to start getting them, it's going to be really hard. And so they're going to require passports, or you're going to get deported, or wherever they're going to send you to. You can't get deported places you ain't never been. So they're just going to export you, not deport you, because we're not, half of us, we ain't been nowhere else. So now they're just going to get rid of us. Then Amendment 6, right to a fair trial. Now, this is my own theory. Okay, this is the way I think. Right to a fair trial. Killing unarmed Black men and women is a violation of this amendment. Now, I never heard anyone say that out loud, but I would think that when the policeman plays a judge and jury by killing you on spot, that's not rights to a fair trial. You never get a chance to make it to prove your innocence, because they're killing you first, right? And even if you didn't have a criminal conviction before, or even if you did, you still supposed to have rights to a fair trial. And if they're killing you before that time frame, then that means that's a violation of your Sixth Amendment, which they never really talk about. So in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. So what I want to look at, how I want you to look at it, is there's always something done to create a new barrier, right? So in the past, your jury would be not of your peers, right? They'll never give you a jury of your peers. And what does that actually mean anyway? A jury of your peers. Because when you sit on jury duty, if they really wanted you to be a jury of your peers, then that means the person that's on trial should get to pick out the people they want on their team, not the lawyers and the DA, right? I mean, I'm just saying. So again, that's kind of some bamboozle type stuff when you really look at it. If you really conceptualize it, it's like, if you want me to have a jury of my peers, then let me go holler and call these people up that are more like me than you. Just saying. Amendment number 8 is bail, fines, punishment. No cruel and unusual punishment is death by a law enforcement officer. So when we talk about no cruel and unusual punishment, we know that again is being violated, because the cruel and unusual punishment again is when there's death by a law enforcement officer or a beat down. Rodney King, for example, for those who don't remember, he's the one that was the thing that spearheaded the LA riots back in early 90s. And so the Casual Killing Act kind of falls underneath that too, where a lot of times, well, I would say this, there was, after, I don't know, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. Before Obama, I think more people was just getting beat down than getting killed. I'm saying it the way I like to say it. So I'm not saying killed like killed, Killed. I say killed, like with a T on it, like, because as a black person we either add T's or S's to our words. So killed is what I really mean, and I'm not talking about the Scottish skirt. So the Casual Killing Act is like legalize the killing of a slave while correcting them. So that's basically law enforcement. They get permission to beat you down, which now they took it a step further after Obama. That's when like Michael, God, I can't remember his name, Michael Brown, was kind of one of the first to kind of, from a larger scale in Ferguson, get murdered by the police just because, right? So again, kind of going back to what we were talking about with blacks were prevented from suing white people, and then the Casual Killing Act. So all of those things, like the snitches get stitches, so again, like blacks were not allowed to tell on white people, but we were allowed to tell on each other. And a lot of that too was a reward system, right? So if you told on your brethren, then you'll be in the master's graces, really, not knowing that that was wrong. And that how Nat Turner could have been a little bit more successful if he didn't get snitched on. So things to pay attention to as I get ready to wrap up. Things to pay attention to: the Heritage Foundation. Do your research. And I might go into this a little bit later about the Heritage Foundation. I think the only reason why I don't want to go too much into it, because I don't want to read 500 pages of the Project 2025. I just don't want to do that. But I know it's not good. And basically the Project 2025 is everything that I am speaking of times 3, right? It's everything that, when they're talking about Terry, you're over exaggerating, or you again, the conspiracy and all this kind of stuff, or it's excessive, like, oh, this is excessive, it's not going to happen. Slavery happened, Jim Crow happened, why this can't happen? And it's that way of thinking, it's that American Boughetto mindset that makes us, we're going to get caught slipping because we're not thinking it can happen when it can. So we gotta take into consideration, what is this America going to look like next year, April 2026? So Donald Trump, what people forget about Donald Trump is Donald Trump was a Democrat before he was a MAGA. Donald Trump started MAGA, which was an extension of Ronald Reagan. When Obama became president, he lost his mind. Okay. And that's when Obama been MAGA ever since. That's when that whole phenomenon started. And then if y'all don't know who Pete Hegseth is a dangerous individual. Pay attention to what's going on with him as well, because he went from the Secretary of Defense to now recreating himself as the Secretary of War. And maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, he had a meeting with all the military leadership to talk about what the future of the service was going to look like for all of them. And basically, he's trying to change it to an all-white man regime. Pay attention to that. Again, creating new minority enemies of color, which is starting to take flight. So again, I'm not speaking to this as an extremist. I'm speaking to you as a realist. as to not to like make fear mongering and nothing like that, just to like pay attention to what's kind of going on. I know a lot of people are not paying attention and they feel like it's not pertaining to them, but it is. And I know people cannot envision what it's going to look like, but trust me when I say this, it's going to get worse before it gets better, especially if people are not paying attention because they're thinking like, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that, and they can. And they are, and they're doing it right underneath our noses. When something is so extreme as to was the institution of Jim Crow and chattel slavery, the Holocaust was extreme. The Holocaust only, my mama was born the year the Holocaust ended. Okay, so that's 80 years ago. That's not long ago. As people would like to, and even though it didn't happen in the United States, you got people who are celebrating Nazism that is actually banned in Germany. So you cannot have swastikas and stuff in Germany, but you can have them here. And KKK, Ku Klux Klan, which is MAGA now, MAGA, they've been around since 1867. They've been here every freaking generation. It's still here. They just rebrand themselves. They was the Tea Party. Now they're MAGA, and now they're the Heritage Foundation. They're the same people. Also pay attention to the fact that Trump, so back, I think I mentioned this in the first video I did. I just want to reiterate again that these are not extreme ideas I'm spitting out here. These are truths. When Trump took that expensive gift from Qatar, that wasn't a gift. That was a bargaining tool. You give me a plane, you let me put a military base in Idaho. What is that going to be when they put what is that going to look like for us to have while they're sitting up here condemning Muslim and Iran or Muslim or Arab countries, but yeah, you're going to let them move a base in the United States? Such a contradiction. That's such a contradiction. So again, what is up with that? Why? And is that going to play a part in having an outside entity put us in check? Right? So maybe it's not going to be the National Guard that's going to police the citizens. Maybe it's going to be these other individuals outside the country. And the only threat is which is the foolery in this is, once you get them over here, are you going to be able to get them out? That's the question, right? How are we going to get them out without having an on-site war on our own land? These white men ain't thought that far ahead. They just want to get rid of the problem. Like, what is that? It's something in history that happened like that, where they brought something in. Maybe it's like invasive fish, right? They brought in an invasive fish to kind of control the other fish population. Then all of a sudden now the invasive fish is a problem, right? Or something to that effect. So they might start by introducing something to get rid of something, and then later on realize they can't get rid of that either. So that is something to think about, okay? For real. That is something to really think about, is that this man is selling the United States of America out. Also, keep in mind, historically, the Civil War was white on white, not white on black or black on white. It was white against white. They just called it blue and red. We call it them nowadays, Crips and Bloods or folks and peoples. But it was red against blue. Still is to this day. The largest gang in the world is the Democrats versus the Republicans, or vice versa. But again, keep in mind, when there was a civil war, it wasn't a civil war against white and black. They were fighting on the behalf of enslavement or freeing slaves as a moral responsibility. But Civil War had nothing to do with black against white. It was always white on white, red against blue, blue against red. Then the 2026 election. So right now, again, paying attention, next year is another big election year. April, starting in February. I know April primary, and then November again. So this is going to be the voting for Congress, state senators, maybe a couple of judges. I have to look that up. I'll follow up with you later on that one. but it is a very, 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 very important election that we're really gonna have to pay attention to. I would say this as well. They need to put on the ballot some changes that need to be ratified, like the term limits and the 25th Amendment. So, what the 25th Amendment is solely about the President of the United States and what that looks like. And so, although they want to impeach him, which I believe the impeachment has to come first before he can be looked upon as treason. Because, and back in the day, treason used to mean they'll kill you as a president. And I don't think nobody ever got that, but this might need to be the first one that happened. I'm going to stop saying that. But this they really need to look at the 25th Amendment. And so call to action would be to start educating people now about the importance of voting rights, future revision of the Constitution, definitely. And I wouldn't even say necessarily a revision, much less a dismantle and rebuilding it from scratch. Because again, who wrote the Constitution are the same type of white men that we're trying to go up against today. And that's just keeping it 100. Think about the Constitution when they appeal. It's like putting patches on old denim jeans or old coat. You can only patch it so much before it's just useless. And so I think that's how you can look at the United States Constitution as it being patched too much to where it just needs to be torn up and redone over again with the diversity of what this country is now, especially with my brothers and sisters from the indigenous communities and the reservations. They really need to tear up those treaties and let them have their rights. Period. That's all I'm saying. And then going from there, in the supremacy, not just the racism, but in the whole superiority or supremacy of it all, and then come back to a civil mindset. So as always, I have to end with my favorite person, one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. I am not against peace. I am against peace that means staying quiet while my people suffer. Malcolm X. And that's it. So these are some book choices that I recommend people read. I do have some of these books that I could probably make available to some people for free. If you are interested, I can get your email address and I can send you some. Other than that, I'm not trying to take money out of nobody's pocket. But again, these are some really good reads, and I suggest at least one book a month to just get your mind right. And also, for those of you who have kids, grandkids, kids, teenagers, young adults, maybe you guys can get a book and just have a session. Just sit down with your kids and have these conversations. Start the education at home. Because this, like Frederick Douglass, they want, you say you want to keep a nigga a slave, hide the books or something like that. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it's like hide the books. And although everybody's maybe not meant for post K through 12 school, you can still educate your mind, because something that our parents and grandparents used to do was read them papers. They used to read the newspapers every single day. I know some of y'all remember that. I don't know about now, but I remember when the newspapers were delivered, they used to read them papers every day. And I don't think people are reading as much. We do a lot of swiping and screen saving, but we don't really read as much. And I would say outside of school, I at least read something of substance every single day. So thank you all for being here, and look forward to doing some more of these. And so just real quick before I wrap up, the ISIS Papers, The Key to the Colors, that's the book by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. That's a really good read. Black at AF History is Michael Harriot. You can check these people out too before you get the book. You can watch them on YouTube, since a lot of you like to watch stuff. You can actually watch their speaking about these things on YouTube. Post-traumatic slave syndrome is by my very, 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 very favorite Dr. Joy DeGruy. Very favorite person. Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery. This is kind of like a book on Willie Lynch, kind of like that whole theoretical framework. Y'all already know the autobiography of Malcolm X. Now I do got the the copy, and then I got the old beat up copy on my bookshelf. Where is it at? Somewhere over there where it's just like really beat up, but I love it. And then Cass is The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. I have not fully read this book from front to back, but I had to read some of it to take some context out of it for my dissertation. And then the second is also a good book that talks about the Second Amendment. This book is about the Second Amendment. Most of, I would say, all these books, yes, all these books are by black people, all of them. The Second Amendment is by Carol Anderson. All of these books, pretty much you can get an introduction of them on YouTube, except for Booker T. Washington, which is The Negro Problem, which is a historic book. And then Bell Hooks Ain't I a Woman is a really good book that speaks to like the matriarch and the history of like black woman feminism and all that kind of stuff. And then Plantation Theory is for you, those of you who work in predominantly white workspaces. Okay, so that book is for people who are like on the maybe corporate level or up in those type of positions where you're working with a lot of white folks. That book is good. I read that book like in a day. And the foreword was also done by Dr. Joy DeGruy. So these, if you can read them all, read them all. But if not, try to get one in at least once every month or once every month or month. And then also have these discussions. Don't just read the books, but have discussions about these books. And so I will be back next week, and I'll figure out what I'm going to talk about, and maybe I'll pick one of these books out to talk specifically about the book. So until then, you guys take care, and I wish the best for all of us. See you soon. Bye-bye.